My name is Ron Whitaker. I'm 57, and until last Tuesday, I was the lead systems engineer at Westfield Data Systems in Austin, Texas. 21 years. I showed up early, stayed late, and kept things running quietly, reliably, without asking for much. I wasn't flashy. I didn't network at company mixers or campaign for promotions. I just did my job. And in IT, that meant everything from untangling server failures at 3 a.m. to tracing rogue code lines that threatened the core architecture. When Carol from HR knocked and entered my office with Erica Department head barely 6 months into the role, I knew what was coming. She held a manila folder like it might bite. Eric wouldn't meet my eye. She began the script. "We regret to inform you," I nodded. That was enough. I didn't need the rest. I stood, opened the cabinet behind me, and quietly began packing my things. The framed photo of my daughters when they were little, standing on the pier with their arms around my legs. My coffee mug, chipped but still readable, world's quietest genius. A stack of USBs labeled in handwriting only I could read. No one said anything. People at Westfield didn't know me as a talker, and I wasn't going to start now. Maya, a junior analyst, passed by as I left. She looked stricken, mouthed, "I'm sorry." I gave her a small nod. She was sharp, one of the few new hires who actually asked questions that mattered. As I walked past the server room for the last time, I paused at the heavy steel door. Years ago, I'd helped design the locking sequence, patching a vulnerability that could have cost the company millions. They never knew it, never asked. At home, the silence hit harder than I expected. My wife Marie had passed 3 years ago, stroke in the middle of a cold November night. Our girls were grown and out on their own. The house felt big in a way it never had before. I sat in the den, surrounded by books I hadn't touched in years, and booted up the secure off-site server I'd maintained quietly. It wasn't secret. Legal had authorized it during a compliance audit 5 years ago, but no one really cared to know what I kept there. And what I had mattered. Project logs, credentials, access trails, records of systems I'd maintained and others I'd warned about, warnings that had been ignored, especially by Eric. Lately, he dismissed a few critical concerns I raised about our vendor transactions. It didn't sit right. I took a slow breath, looked at the calendar. Tuesday. I poured a cup of coffee and stared at the screen. They thought they'd closed the book on me. They hadn't realized I'd just turned the page. After Carol and Eric left my office that day, I didn't waste time replaying the conversation. I'd learned years ago that clarity doesn't always arrive with closure. Some answers never come, but actions reveal plenty. That night, after dinner, a simple grilled cheese and tomato soup, I opened the file I'd been building for the last 6 months. I hadn't labeled it with anything dramatic, just a folder called Invoice Irregularities Q1, Q2. I'd started it out of instinct. Something about the transactions didn't sit right. It began with one invoice from a vendor I didn't recognize, Cascade Core Tech. It showed up in our payment system in January. Looked ordinary. Small dollar amount, under the radar. But the approval process had a timestamp that didn't match our usual batch schedule. I checked the access logs. It was approved using an account linked to Eric, except the IP address was out of sequence. Not an internal one. It was remote. Masked. That's what made me suspicious. I didn't bring it up right away. People assume when you're quiet, you don't notice things. That's fine. I've spent most of my career in the background, letting the loud folks take credit while I kept systems alive through weekend patches and 3 a.m. restores. My job wasn't recognition. It was responsibility. So I watched and logged. Each month, a new Cascade invoice showed up, slightly larger than the last. None of them matched known projects. There was no scope of work filed, no support tickets, no project ID. Yet they passed through approvals clean as a whistle. By May, the monthly payments had crossed into 6 figures. At home, I told no one. Not my daughters. Not my old fishing buddy Carl, who checks in every Friday. Not even my neighbor Joanne, who drops off cornbread every other weekend and keeps hoping I'll bring it up. I kept it to myself because I wasn't finished. I dug deeper. Cascade Core Tech was listed as an LLC, registered in the state of Oregon, using a virtual address connected to a UPS store. The owner? A man named Justin Merrick. I ran a background, check basic stuff, publicly available. He wasn't an employee, wasn't listed on any Westfield vendor partnership lists. But he had something else, a LinkedIn profile linking him to Eric. They'd gone to college together. Same graduating class. Roommates. That's when I realized this wasn't just lazy accounting. It was deliberate. Each invoice had been formatted to pass a high-level audit. But Eric had made one mistake. He'd used my automated scripts to process them, unaware that I'd built in a tracking layer years ago on design for internal integrity checks after we had a breach scare in 2015. Every signature, every approval, every change left a digital fingerprint. So I had everything, not just suspicions evidence. The next day, I contacted Dana Calderon, one of the board members. She'd been in charge of security compliance back in 2016 when a ransomware attack had nearly brought our network down. I'd helped her then. She hadn't forgotten. "Ron," she said when she picked up, "I heard about Tuesday. I am sorry." "Appreciate it," I said, "but I'm not calling about that." I told her what I had. No speculation, just facts. She was quiet for a beat. "Then, send me everything. But do it securely. This may be bigger than you think." That night, I packaged the files. Used encryption protocols she would recognize. Along with the raw data, I included a summary of what I'd found: dates, amounts, access logs, the registration data tying Merrick to Eric, and a few screenshots for visual clarity. Then I waited. By Thursday morning, the board had called an emergency meeting. Friday evening, Dana called again. "You were right," she said. "We confronted Eric with the data. He didn't even try to deny it. Just said something about loyalty and modernization. He's on administrative leave. The investigation's expanding." I poured a cup of tea and took it to the back porch. The sun was setting low across the cedar trees. Moby, my old Labrador, laid his head on my boot. "It's not about revenge," I told Dana. "It's about fixing what's broken." "I know," she replied, "which is why the board wants to speak with you." "I'm not looking for my old job back," I said. "They're not offering your old job," she said. "They want you to oversee systems integrity, independent reporting, clean slate. You'd report directly to us." That caught me off guard. I'd worked in IT for most of my adult life, but I'd never had that kind of authority. And yet, the idea didn't scare me. It felt necessary. "Only if I have hiring control and full audit authority," I said. "You'll have both." I nodded. "Then I'll come in Monday." She paused. "You're sure?" "Dana, I've never been more sure of anything." Later that night, I updated my daughters. Told them I'd been offered a new role. Told them it was more responsibility, but more meaningful too. My oldest, Lauren, said, "I'm proud of you, Dad. You always do the right thing." It wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what needed to be done quietly, precisely, without fanfare. They'd underestimated me, and now they were going to learn what that really meant. That weekend, I stayed mostly quiet. I didn't open my laptop, didn't check work emails not that I had access anymore, and didn't dwell on the headlines beginning to circle around Westfield. Instead, I cleaned the gutters, raked the yard, and repaired a loose board on the porch step that had been bugging me for months. There's a steadiness in tending to small things. They remind you that life keeps moving, even when everything else feels uncertain. Sunday afternoon, Lauren and Jenny stopped by. They brought over some groceries, not that I needed them, but it was their way of checking in. Moby barked once and settled under the dining room table, content just to have company. "You doing okay, Dad?" Jenny asked as she put away a few cans. "Getting there," I said. Lauren looked at me. "You haven't said much about what happened. You sure you're all right?" I nodded slowly. "It's not the losing the job that got to me," I told them. "It's realizing how easily people forget where the foundation came from. But that's all right. I didn't do the work to be remembered. I did it to keep things running." That's when I noticed something shift in them. Not pity, respect. They'd grown up with a father who didn't miss work, who fixed the internet when it crashed, who showed up to school concerts in dusty work boots and made sure their world stayed intact. They understood what I meant, even if they couldn't say it in words. On Monday morning, I walked into Westfield again, not as an employee returning to his old desk, but as a man stepping into a new role with a different mission. I didn't bring my usual thermos. Didn't need the world's quietest genius mug. Just brought a leather-bound notebook, a pen, and the resolve not to let what happened slide quietly under the rug. Dana met me in the lobby and handed me a temporary badge. "We'll have a permanent one ready later this week," she said. "But today we just need you to listen." She led me upstairs to the boardroom. It was the same conference table I'd sat outside of so many times, waiting to install updates, replace projectors, or quietly reboot routers during lunch breaks. Funny how you can spend years just outside a room you're finally invited into. Inside, the atmosphere was different still, but weighted. The acting CEO, a calm man named Harold Brooks, greeted me with a nod. "Mr. Whitaker, thank you for being here. We owe you more than an apology. We owe you the opportunity to make things right." "I'm not here for apologies," I said. "I'm here to fix the system." He respected that. I could tell. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. They laid out the extent of the fraud as they currently understood Iteric's manipulation of invoice approvals, the shell companies, and now indications that a second senior leader in procurement may have turned a blind eye. I added a few names. Quietly. When it was over, I was handed a new title, Director of Systems Integrity, with a mandate to build a team focused solely on compliance, transparency, and resilience. "We need your eyes on everything," Dana said. "Past, present, and future." "Then I'll need full access," I said, "and the freedom to bring in people I trust." "You'll have it," Harold replied. That afternoon, I returned to my old department, not to sit in a cubicle, but to take quiet stock of who was still watching and who had looked the other way when things went wrong. Stephen was there, head down, typing away like always. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Mr. Whitaker Ronyery back." "Something like that," I said. He followed me into the break room. "I wanted to say I felt terrible when they let you go. I knew something was off, but—" "You don't have to explain," I said. "But I do have a question for you." "Sure. Anything. You ever think about doing more than just monitoring dashboards?" His eyes blinked once. "Like what?" "Like building them from the ground up. Securely. Thoughtfully. Not because someone told you to, but because it's the right way to do the job." "I'd like that," he said. "I've always wanted to, just didn't know if anyone would give you the chance." "You've got it," I said. "By Friday, I have my office. Not a corner, sweet nothing flashy, but a solid space with a door, a window, and a wall I could fill with whiteboards and flowcharts." I spent the rest of the week mapping out what would become the company's first operational integrity review system. Not just looking for fraud, but ensuring no one could pull the same stunt again. I didn't work late that week. I came home on time, took Moby for walks, cooked real meals, let the girls come over for movie night. Balance after years of imbalance. I knew I couldn't fix every broken system, but I could fix this one. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just maintaining things, I was building something that might actually last. By the second week in my new position, I began each morning the same way, a slow walk through the building. No clipboard, no laptop, just me and a quiet eye. You'd be surprised how much you can learn by simply walking past desks, noticing who's locked in, who's fidgeting, and who lowers their screen when you pass. At 57, I had no intention of micromanaging anyone. But after what had happened, I wasn't about to leave blind spots behind. Stephen had come on board officially as my lead analyst. He'd moved out of the bullpen and into the small office next to mine. Sharp kid, methodical, thoughtful, still a little green when it came to reading between the lines, but he asked the right questions and, more importantly, listened to the answers. One of our first tasks was identifying how deep Eric's fraud had gone. Dana from the board wanted numbers, but I told her what we needed first was patterns. "Fraud doesn't just happen," I said. "It develops like rust, starts small, spreads quiet, and before you know it, it's in the foundation." We started with procurement records. Dozens of vendors, dozens of payment trails. Some legit, some clearly not. But what stood out weren't the payments, it was the approvals. Names that kept appearing together. Same times of day. Same IP ranges. Small signs like fingerprints on glass. Cascade Cortec had been Eric's shell company, but there were others' names that didn't raise red flags because they were just common enough. One, Delta Logic Services had billed over $200,000 across 18 months for platform diagnostics. We had no such platform. That's 4 invoices, all signed off by the same 2 mid-level managers, Stephen said, pointing at his screen. They didn't even stagger the billing addresses. Because no one was looking, I replied. Now we are. We didn't go after people publicly. That wasn't the goal. This wasn't about a show of force. It was about restoring integrity without burning the whole structure down. Behind closed doors, I had conversations. Quiet ones. Sometimes with folks I'd worked beside for years. Other times with names I barely recognized. Most were scared, some ashamed. A few were arrogant, thinking they'd been too clever to be found out. People don't usually lie to cause chaos, I told Stephen one morning. They lie to protect something. Usually fear, pride, or comfort. He nodded, taking notes. A week later, I got an unexpected call from Carol in HR, the same one who'd sat across from me on the day I was let go. Ron, she said, do you have a minute? For you? I have 5. We met in her office. It hadn't changed. Still the same overwatered fern in the corner. Still the same framed quote. Do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Funny how easily those words become decoration. I wanted to say I was sorry, she began. About how things were handled. About your exit. I let the silence hang. Not because I wanted to make her squirm, but because I wanted her to mean it. I should have spoken up, she said finally. But Arish was positioned as the future. I figured resisting would just mean I'd be next. I get it, I said. We all do what we think we need to survive. But now we're cleaning that up. Carol nodded. I want to help, if there's a place for that. There might be, I said, standing, but it has to be for the right reasons now. Not just to keep your seat. She looked me in the eye. Understood. Back in my office, I sat down and updated our internal audit notes. One by one, we were connecting the dots not just on bad actors, but on broken systems. Weak approvals. No cross-checks. Too much trust in too few hands. Trust is earned, not assumed. That was becoming the cornerstone of the new department. Midway through the month, the board held another closed-door session. This time, I was asked to present. Not as a whistleblower, but as a strategist. I kept my presentation simple. No flashy slides. Just one image on the projector. A basic flow chart showing our current vulnerability points. Every breach we've had, financial, procedural, reputational, can be traced back to one thing, I said. Lack of visibility. We trusted systems we didn't audit, people we didn't monitor, and processes we didn't protect. I outlined our proposal. A rotating compliance review schedule, mandatory vendor verification, dual sign-off policies for all invoices over $10,000, and whistleblower protections that didn't route through management. This isn't about catching bad apples, I said. It's about protecting the orchard. They voted unanimously. Full backing. After the meeting, Harold pulled me aside. You ever consider doing this at a national level? He asked. Policy building? I raised an eyebrow. He nodded. Companies everywhere are dealing with the same thing. Quiet fraud. Internal corrosion. You got a blueprint. Maybe someday, I said. Right now, I just want to fix this one orchard. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of iced tea. Sat on the porch with Moby curled up beside me and the Texas sun low on the horizon. The job wasn't done. Not even close. But for the first time in years, I wasn't just solving problems, I was preventing them. And in my line of work, that's as close to peace as a man can ask for. By early April, the tension in the building had changed, not loud or obvious, but taut like a wire pulled just tight enough to hum. The spotlight that had once been squarely on Eric was now casting long shadows across departments, uncovering habits that had thrived in the dark for years. Ron had never been a man who sought power, but power has a way of finding the person who's most willing to carry responsibility without abusing it. That's who he'd always tried to be. Stephen came into his office late one Wednesday, holding a folder and looking uneasy. You need to see this, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. Ron opened the folder and saw the name at the top, Gina Harlan, Procurement. A name he recognized. Gina had been at Westfield longer than him, though she'd always kept to her own corner of the building. Unassuming, efficient, According to the audit report Stephen had compiled, Gina had approved just over $180,000 in vendor rush fees over the past 18 months. All to the same firm Logie Craft Supply. The name checked out. So did the invoices. But when Stephen cross-referenced the company registration, it traced back to Gina's nephew, a full-time college student with no business license until 6 months after the first payment. "This is a mess," Stephen muttered. "I don't even think she was trying to steal. I think she was just helping him get started, figuring no one would look too closely." "But that's the problem, isn't it?" Ron replied. "It's always someone trying to help someone else without following the rules. Until it isn't." They sat in silence for a moment before Stephen asked, "What do we do?" Ron leaned back. "We handle it the same way we've handled everything else. Quietly. Fairly. But we don't ignore it." That Friday, Ron met with Gina in a conference room that overlooked the loading dock. He'd chosen the location deliberately neutral space, private, far from her usual corner of the office. He laid the documents out slowly. No questions. She didn't argue. Didn't cry either. Just looked down at her hands and said, "I thought I was doing a good thing, helping him get started. The fees were real way needed the shipments." "I believe you," Ron said, "but it doesn't change what it looks like on paper, or what it would mean if we didn't flag it now." She nodded. "So what happens next?" "That depends on you," he said. "You can cooperate with the internal review and step away quietly, or we go through the formal process." She chose the former. That evening, as Ron walked to the parking lot, he saw a small group from accounting huddled by the vending machines. The conversation stopped as he passed, not with hostility but with unease. He wasn't just Ron from systems anymore. He was watching. And people don't always like being watched, even if they have nothing to hide. Andrea noticed it too. "You've been quieter lately," she said one evening over dinner. Ron took a long sip of water. "It's strange. I thought cleaning up the mess would bring clarity. But the more we dig, the more it feels like I'm the only one who wants to fix it." "You're not," she said gently. "You're just the only one willing to be the face of it." That hit home. He knew some employees resented the shift. People who had long operated under informal arrangements bartering favors for vendor access, pushing contracts through without full reviews now, felt boxed in. Oversight, even fair oversight, felt like judgment to those who weren't used to answering for their actions. And then came the anonymous email. It landed in Ron's inbox late one Monday night. No greeting, no sign-off, just a single line. "You've made a lot of enemies, Whitaker. Might want to sleep with one eye open." He read it 3 times. Not because he was afraid wasn't, but because the cowardice of it struck him. If they were trying to scare him, they didn't know him well enough. Still, he logged the message, encrypted it, and sent a copy to Dana on the board with a brief note. "If someone's nervous enough to send this, we're getting close to something important." She called within the hour. "Do you feel safe?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Yes," Ron replied. "But I'd like the security logs reviewed." Quietly. "Done." That same week, Stephen came to him with another report. This one was different, not fraud, but oversight failure. A server containing sensitive HR data had been left unpatched for nearly 4 months, leaving it vulnerable to outside access. No breach had occurred, but it was only a matter of time. It was assigned to Eric before he left, Stephen explained. But no one picked it up. Fell through the cracks. Ron closed the file slowly. "Post a memo," he said. "Mandatory review of all legacy systems. I want names assigned and dates signed off." Stephen hesitated. "That'll ruffle feathers." "It's not about feathers," Ron said. "It's about function." The work was far from glamorous. It wasn't headlines or applause. It was long hours, quiet corrections, and the kind of diligence that never makes the news but keeps the lights on. He never raised his voice, never threatened. He simply persisted. Because in a world full of shortcuts, the long road is still the one that leads home. By the time summer settled into Texas with its familiar, heavy heat, Ron Whitaker had grown used to starting his days before the rest of the office even stirred. He liked the quiet of early mornings, when the halls were still, the coffee fresh, and the servers humming like a content animal. It was in those early hours that he did his best thinking. He needed it now more than ever. Since assuming the role of Director of Systems Integrity, Ron had turned over more rocks than he thought possible. Some revealed careless mistakes, others uncovered deeper issues. But the one thing they all had in common was that they festered in silence, unnoticed or ignored until someone finally asked the right questions. That morning, Ron sat across from Gerald, a mid-level IT manager who looked like he hadn't slept in days. On the table between them were printed logs showing irregular access attempts to employee payroll data. "This isn't the first time," Ron said, tapping one of the timestamps. "You ran this script 4 times last month. You never reported it." Gerald swallowed hard. "It was for review. I was comparing compensation bands. I didn't think it was a big deal." Ron didn't raise his voice. He never did. "You didn't think it was a big deal to bypass security protocols to access restricted compensation data without authorization?" Gerald looked down. "It was stupid. I know. It was more than stupid. It was a breach of trust." Ron suspended him on the spot. No grand speech, no HR entourage, just clear consequences. Word would get around, as it always did. But Ron wasn't interested in theatrics. He wanted the culture to change from the inside out. When he returned to his office, Dana Calderon was waiting. The board liaison had made a habit of checking in unannounced. Ron didn't mind. She was one of the few who truly seemed invested in fixing the company from its core. "Gerald?" she asked, as he closed the door. "Suspended. Unauthorized access to payroll logs. It's in the report." She nodded, flipping through the file he'd emailed her that morning. "You're moving fast. No faster than the problems require." Dana paused. "How are you holding up?" Ron leaned back in his chair. "Depend on the day. Some mornings I feel like we're making progress. Other times, I feel like I'm plugging holes in a dam with my hands. That's the job." He offered a tired smile. "It is now." Later that week, a scheduled audit of vendor contracts revealed another red flag: a long-standing consulting retainer with a firm that hadn't delivered any documented work in over a year. The paper trail was vague, the scope of work poorly defined, and the invoices signed off by someone who no longer worked at the company. Ron brought it to the attention of the interim CFO, a no-nonsense woman named Karen Liu. She was new, but sharp. After reviewing the files, she looked up and said, "You think this was intentional? I think it was convenient. Someone got comfortable charging for nothing, and no one thought to stop it." Karen pursed her lips. "Terminate the agreement immediately and flag any similar arrangements." The next morning, an anonymous envelope was left on Ron's desk. No note. Inside were printed emails between former executives discussing ghost vendors and a plan to reroute consulting fees through dummy accounts. The timestamps went back over 2 years. Ron didn't need to guess who left it. He had a few quiet allies throughout the company, people who couldn't speak up before, but now trusted him enough to start sharing pieces of the truth. He forwarded the documents to Dana and Karen. The next week, the board approved a full forensic audit of all vendor contracts dating back 5 years. Ron knew the pushback would come, and it did. That Friday, someone slashed his tires in the employee parking lot. No witnesses. Security footage was conveniently missing from the camera nearest his space. He didn't report it. Just called a tow truck, replaced the tires, and quietly moved his parking spot to the front of the building. The message was received, but not the one they intended. Saturday morning, Ron sat on his back porch, Moby at his feet, and wrote up a new internal policy: anonymous whistleblower protection, with direct reporting lines to his office and the board. Andrea stepped outside with 2 mugs of coffee. "I saw the tires," she said, handing him a cup. He nodded. "Part of the job. You're doing the right thing, even if it makes people uncomfortable." Ron looked out across the yard. The sunrise was just starting to warm the sky. "I've been invisible most of my career," he said. "Now that people can finally see me, some wish they couldn't." Andrea sat beside him. "Then let them blink. You keep looking forward." Ron sipped his coffee, the warmth steady in his chest. "That's the plan." The weeks that followed my reinstatement at Westfield moved slowly, but with purpose. I wasn't stepping back into the same shoes I'd worn for 2 decades. I was entering with new authority, and with that came a heavier responsibility. The role of Director of Systems Integrity wasn't ceremonial. I'd insisted on a direct reporting line to the board, bypassing all executive interference. It was their idea to make it public within the company. Transparency, they said. Accountability. I agreed. My first act wasn't revenge. It was reinforcement. I rewrote our security protocols from the ground up, scrapped every outdated approval hierarchy, and personally vetted every staff member in our department. No more assumptions, no more blind trust. I also insisted on bringing Maya from analytics into my team. She had sharp instincts and quiet integrity qualities that didn't get noticed enough in a fast-moving place like ours. She hesitated at first, uncertain about the politics of it all, but eventually said yes. "You've got good instincts," I told her one morning as we stood in front of the data center. "We need that more than ever." She smiled slightly. "Thanks for noticing." Outside the office, things are changing too. I started taking evening walks again, something I hadn't done since before the pandemic. Sometimes just around the block, other times all the way to Zilker Park. My knees reminded me I was 57, but my lungs appreciated the fresh air. I started keeping a small notepad in my coat pocket. Not for work notes, just thoughts. Observations. Questions that came to mind when the world got quiet. My daughters, Rachel and Anne, were calling more frequently now. At first, it was to check in after everything happened, but those calls grew longer, warmer. Rachel told me she was thinking of moving back to Texas with her husband and was considering graduate school in Houston. They didn't say it directly, but I sensed they'd both been shaken by how fast the ground beneath a person could shift and how a father who once seemed immovable could still be blindsided. I think they needed to see me steady again, for their sake as much as mine. And I was getting there. Eric's investigation deepened. The board brought in outside counsel and forensic auditors. Turns out, the financial misconduct with Cascade Cortec had been going on longer than I thought, nearly 3 years. Multiple shell companies, cross-invoicing, and even forged IT expense approvals. He'd built a structure of corruption that only worked because nobody ever questioned the quiet parts of our operations. Until now, Dana Calderon kept me updated. She was sharp, still the best board member I'd ever worked with. "We're making changes at the top," she told me during one of our bi-weekly check-ins. "Some people are retiring early. Others are being quietly asked to move on." I nodded. "House cleaning." She smiled. "Spring comes eventually." One afternoon, I stopped by the empty office that used to belong to Eric. The blinds were drawn. A single mug still sat on the desk, Westfield's logo printed in fading blue. I stood there for a moment, not out of gloating, but reflection. We'd shared meetings, decisions, even a few lunches over the years. I didn't hate him. I just saw him clearly now and wondered how long he'd been lying to himself before lying to everyone else. On my way out, I passed the hallway where Carol from HR had delivered the news of my termination. She caught my eye and gave a polite nod, unsure if we were supposed to pretend that day never happened. I paused. "Carol," I said. She turned. "No hard feelings. But next time someone builds your entire digital security framework, maybe don't walk them out with a canned speech." She looked down, embarrassed. "Fair point, Ron. I'm sorry." "Thanks," I said, and meant it. One Saturday, I drove out to Bastrop, where my uncle's old cabin had sat in use since he passed. I've been meaning to clean it out for years. Now seemed like the right time. The place smelled like dust and cedar, just as I remembered. I found old photos of fishing trips, tools worn smooth from decades of use, and a folded map of the Colorado River with handwritten notes in the margins. I brought some of it back with me reminders that foundations, when built right, don't just collapse. Back at home, I started working on a small side project. Nothing fancy. A piece of software designed to monitor internal network behavior in real-time, flagging not just breaches, but inconsistencies in approval chains, usage anomalies, and access drift. Maya helped me shape it into something more robust. We joked about calling it the Canary because it warned before the mine went dark. I sent a demo to Dana. A week later, she called to say the board wanted to fund it. "We'll roll it out across departments by fall," she said. "It's simple, elegant, and impossible to fake." "Like the truth," I replied. At night, I'd still sit in my den sometimes, thinking about the year everything changed, about what I lost, what I found, and what I learned in the quiet moments between endings and new beginnings. I wasn't trying to recapture who I used to be. I was trying to build something steadier, more honest, more useful. And I had. That fall, I gave a guest lecture at a local university. The topic was organizational resilience in IT. At the end, a student asked me what the most important lesson was after 30 years in tech. I paused, thought carefully, and said, "Never assume silence means someone's not paying attention. Some of us are just waiting for the right Tim." A few months after the dust had settled, I found myself back in the same chair on the back porch where I'd once sat the evening after I was let go. That night, I'd held a mug of cold coffee and the weight of a life I thought had been stripped clean. Now, I held a warm cup of chamomile tea and something far better clarity. The company had changed. Not just the names on the doors or the structure on paper, but the air in the halls. People walked with more intention. Questions got asked more often. New systems had been adopted, some of them mine. The Canary had done more than catch fraud. It had restored a kind of institutional honesty we hadn't even known we'd lost. They put my name on the patent. I didn't ask for that, but it meant something. One morning, I arrived early and found Maya already at her desk. She was reviewing logs, humming quietly to herself. I stood in the doorway for a second before she noticed me. "You're early," I said. She smiled. "Just wanted to make sure the overnight patch worked." It had. We checked together, and then I sat beside her for a bit, watching the code scroll past. "You know," she said, "you never really told me why you didn't go after Eric Harder. You had enough to bury him." I thought for a moment. Because I didn't need to watch him fall to know, I stood back up. That quiet strength, being able to walk away from vengeance and still stand with dignity, that's what I came to understand in those months. Not everything broken needs to be shattered. Some things just need to be taken apart carefully so they don't hurt anyone else on the way down. Westfield moved forward. So did I. Outside of work, I picked up woodworking again. I built a canoe rack for the garage, refinished a rocking chair I'd found at the Bastrop cabin, even started sketching plans for a desk I could build with my own hand snow screws, just with patience. I took mornings slow and kept Sundays sacred. The girls came home for Thanksgiving that year. We sat around the table, candles lit, laughter spilling into the quiet corners of the house. They hugged me tighter than they had in years and said, "We're proud of you, Dad." I didn't say much back, just nodded. Some moments don't need words to be full. On the first warm day of spring, I opened the windows in the house and let the breeze move through. It smelled of new leaves and distant rain. I thought about the systems I'd repaired, the people I'd lifted, the storm I'd weathered, and the fact that, somehow, I'd become the kind of man who didn't have to raise his voice to be heard. The kind of man who walked into the storm quietly and walked back out standing. Not bitter, not broken, just whole. And that, in the end, was enough.